Please welcome our third discussant lecturer, Dr. Pradana Boy Zulian from the University of Muhammadiyah, Malang, Indonesia. Allow me to read the short bio of Dr. Zulian. Dr. Zulian is an associate professor in Islamic Legal Studies at the Faculty of Islamic Studies, University of Muhammadiyah, Malang in Indonesia. He currently holds a position as Vice Dean for Academic Affairs, Faculty of Islamic Studies. He is trained as an Islamic legal scholar at University of Muhammadiyah, Malang between 1995 and 2000. After completing his degree in Islamic law, Dr. Pradana pursued Masters of Arts in Contemporary Islamic Thought and Movements in Southeast Asia at the Faculty of Asian Studies, Australian National University in Canberra, Australia. His master's is completed in 2007. In 2015, he gained his PhD in Sociology of Islamic Law from the Department of Malay Studies, National University of Singapore. In addition, he studied politics at University of Massachusetts, United States of America in 2017, and Islamic Thought and Philosophy at Al-Mustafa International University in Qom, Iran in 2020. As an academic, Dr. Pradana is actively involved in many social activities and organizations. Currently, he is a member of the Propagation or Missionary Council of Muhammadiyah Central Board in Jakarta. At the same time, he is the head of Islamic Boarding School Development of the Council of Muhammadiyah Provincial Board in East Java. Other than this, he founded Bait al-Hikmah Foundation, an Islamic-based social foundation dedicated for educating young generation and developing inclusive understanding of Islamic teachings. In 2018 up to 2019, Dr. Pradana served the Presidential Office of the Republic of Indonesia as Presidential Staff for Interreligious Affairs. Dr. Pradana is also internationally active. He currently holds a position as Indonesian Fellow at Islam and Liberty Network, a global network working for freedom of religion in the context of Islam. He is also a member of the Global Exchange on Religion in Society based in Germany. Ladies and gentlemen, let us give a warm welcome to Dr. Pradana Boy Zulian.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Honorable Chief Justice, organizers, fellow presenters, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I thank the organizer for having me here. It is a great honor for me to be with you all in this lovely place in a scholarly discussion as part of effort to adequately place Islamic law or Sharia in the context of national legal system of the Philippines, especially in the reference to the Bangsamoro existence. I would like to speak about Indonesian experience of the application of Sharia, not only about best practices, but also bad experience. So let me start by presenting a brief story. In one day in Ramadan, I deliver my sermon to a crowd or to Jama'ah. And then I say to them that, are you happy with the fact that during Ramadan, the number of crime are decreasing? And the crowd said, we are very happy. But then I said, please think deeply. Why in Ramadan, the number of crime are decreasing? That means that out of Ramadan, those criminals are mostly Muslims. So how do we deal with this? And then say, so this is about how do we deal with Islamic law in Indonesia. But considering the nature of this topic, in this very limited time, I will speak from a politics of law perspective about the existence of Islamic law in Indonesia, and then I will offer an analysis on its future prospect. In chronological order, I would firstly like to trace the root and origin of Islamic law in Indonesia, or in the past we know it as Nusantara. This meant to be the foundation, as I believe, that understanding period and mode of establishment for Islamic law in Indonesia will serve as an essential ingredient to comprehensively grasp the complex dynamic of Islamic law in Indonesia from time to time. So let me start from the historical context. From this point, I think Indonesia as a modern nation state share common history with the Philippines and also with Malaysia. The history of Islamic law in Indonesia covers a wide period from pre-colonialism era in the period of Sultanate around 14th century to colonialism period to post-independent and to reform era in our time now. The coming of Islam in the archipelago, then known as Nusantara, has significantly changed the system of belief of Nusantara people at the time. I argue that the system of belief deals not only with the cognitive conviction on abstract element of life, but it also shapes people behaviors in relation to worldly dimension of life. This is also the case with Islam in Nusantara and of course everywhere. When Islam came and substituted local system of beliefs previously present within Nusantara society, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, and other local beliefs, Islam played a role as a dominant force for the whole aspect for life for the Nusantara inhabitant. However, some scholars doubt the level of Islam's influence for Nusantara people. The late Merle Lickleff, a prominent historian from Australia, he argued that people of Indonesia never been fully or substantially Islamized. For him, the dominant wave within Islam in Nusantara, or in Indonesia today, and more specifically in Java, one of the most condensed or most populated island in Indonesia, is a blend of Islam and mysticism. Islam is at the skin level only, and the essence is mysticism. This is what Lickleff claimed. This claim indeed can find its truth and relevant, but I believe that it is not applicable for the whole context of Muslim society in Nusantara. Two bases on which I base my disagreement with this mystic synthesis are, first, the existence of Islamic legal system within the circle of Muslim Sultanate in Nusantara. In this context, again, I say that we, Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, and maybe Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam share our common history. And the second is the fact that Indonesian Islam is not a monolithic context. As the first basis is most relevant to this section, I will elaborate more on this rather than to the second basis. Islam is also a comprehensive life, so it is understandable that the coming of Islam has also manifested in the adoption of Islamic law as integral part of Islamic teaching. So we see in Java, for example, the Sultanate of Demak, the first Islamic state founded by Raden Patah, a half-Chinese prince, the son of Majapahit monarchs named Brawijaya, can be presented as a case. In its time, Demak served as one epicentrum of Islam and Islamic law, which also brought consequence of the application of Islamic law in this newly founded polity. However, whether Islamic law was really applied in the Sultanate of Demak or not, it is a subject for academic debate. In general, there are two opposing views. The first view holds conviction of the application of Islamic law by the Sultan, And according to this view, Islamic law was applied for the whole stratum and dimension of Demak society. Among evidence of this theory proposed is the composition of Islamic law book in Javanese language called Solo Kantoro, and another book called Angger Suryo Alam. These two works was believed as undang-undang or laws for Demak Sultanate. However, in contrast to this view, the second view, usually known as pessimist group, maintains that the application of Islamic law in Demak Sultanate was minor and superficial, as Hindu and Buddhist elements were still dominant. The proponents of this group include Western scholars such as Barry Hooker, de Graaf, and Piaget. And Hooker argues that Islamic law in Demak Sultanate was blurred, as it is blended with customary laws, while de Graaf and Piaget maintain that the application of Islamic law in Demak was very limited and remote. So to me, the second view echoes Recleff's thesis on the mystic synthesis, but in a more specific reference to Islamic law, while the first view represent indigenous or local scholars. So from this point we can see might be not real conflict, but contestation of concept between Western and maybe Southeast Asian scholars regarding the role of Islamic law within society. Other than Demak, the application of Islamic law in Nusantara Sultanate can also be traced from Malay Peninsula, as Nizam has mentioned about Malacca. And also we can see below this archipelago, we can go down to Manado, to Celebes, the Goa Sultanate, and also Bima Sultanate in East Nusa Tenggara. So, up to this point, it can be concluded that Islamic law had been widely practiced by Muslims in Nusantara around 13th or 14th centuries. However, when Netherlands came to Indonesia around 17th centuries, many bad experiences took place. The first one is the coming of Netherlands in Indonesia in 17th century, actually under the banner of VOC, a Dutch company, a Dutch trade company. The existence of Islamic law did not experience significant changes. Islamic law was allowed to be practiced by Muslims. Nevertheless, in later period of colonialism, the dynamic turned to be more complicated. In general, there were two facets of Islamic law application in the time of Dutch colonialism. The first phase took place from 17th century to 19th century. In this period, Islamic law was fully acknowledged by the Dutch under the theory of receptio in complexu. This theory contained principle that Netherlands is indeed people or Indonesian people in current situation. In ruling their affairs, the law of their religions is applicable. So at the first time where the VOC was very kind of the application of Islamic law. This theory was coined by Ludwig Willem Christian van den Berg. It is based on the fact that Islamic law had previously been practiced by Nusantara people prior the coming of Dutch, and that in earlier period that colonialism. But then during after 19th century, situation of Islamic law changed very significantly as a new theory was introduced, namely receptio, theory of reception, that Islamic law can only be applied by Nusantara people after it is incorporated within customary laws. So it's like subordinated Islamic law into customary law. In modern situation, we see Islamic law also play very important role in Indonesian society. In post-independent Sukarno was very hostile to Islam in the late of his in the last part of his power, and then continued by Suharto. In early period of his power, Suharto was also showing his hostility toward Islam. But then, maybe in second half of his power, Suharto saw his favor to Islamic law. So in 1974, Islamic marriage law was enacted. And then followed by 1989, the establishment of Islamic religious code for the whole province in Indonesia. So for Muslim, we have choice whether we will file our case for dispute in Islamic court or in civil courts. But the Islamic religious code was officially enacted by President in 1989. And the existence or the establishment of Pengadilan Agama or Islamic religious code is not only about institution, but Suharto also allowed the compilation of Indonesian Islamic law, called, in Bahasa Indonesia we call it Kompilasi Hukum Islam. This is like a guide for any judges within Islamic religious code to decide any dispute within this Islamic religious code. The question is, what are the sources for this Indonesian Islamic law compilation? It is interesting to say that the Kompilasi Hukum Islam or Indonesian Islamic law compilation is a compilation of 4 fiqh of the madhab. So many people confidently say that Kompilasi Hukum Islam is actually Indonesian version of fiqh, because it is consisted of many local elements and also blended between Indonesian values. And in our situation now, after the reform era, after the collapse of Suharto, more and more Islamic law are formalized, such as law on zakat, law on haji, law on endowment, and also law about Islamic banking. So recently, Indonesian government merged all Syariah banking in state-owned bank into one single bank called Bank Syariah Indonesia. So all this kind of dynamic tell us not only about best practices, but also bad experience by Indonesia from time to time. Thank you very much for your understanding.